Thank you all for, I know it was a short break, but thank you all for coming back. Before I start, of course, at the expense of perhaps not recognizing another elected official that may be in the room, but I am going to recognize my good friend and also alumni of our executive program several times over, the mayor of Laguna Niguel, my good friend Fred Minagar, who is here as well. And we do have a bunch of mayors and council members online, by the way. There's about 100 or so folks who had signed up, and there were a number of elected officials who are following us live right now. So I greet them as well. Thank you very much for being here. This panel is actually our first panel for the morning, and it gives me great pleasure again to moderate this, but we really intended this to be more organic in nature. I want this to be a conversation among our experts who are seated here. I will remind you that I am not going to read their bios, but because they're all available to you, and frankly, they're all of them so accomplished that we would spend the entire hour for me reading their bios, so that's not going to work out. That being said, let me set the stage and then turn to our experts. And to our experts, feel free to comment on one another just as well so that it is an organic conversation. There are a couple of microphones in front of you. I'll kind of stand here so that I have this microphone, although I do have a mic in my pocket, but it's easier to stand here. So let me kind of set the stage. I speak to my students as well as to various groups when I talk about this topic that I consider a challenge for most of us. I really don't like the word problem necessarily because there's a human factor involved here, as was well expressed by a few of the colleagues who were here before. But I don't, first of all, view homes as, or lack thereof, as the cause for homelessness, but clearly homes, or more production of homes, are helpful for the solution of homelessness. I also don't believe that this is an issue that should be divisive. I believe that it's an all hands on deck kind of issue, and collaboration is only possible if we engage all sectors and all communities alike. Finally, the reason why we put this together, and hopefully, and the reason why we're recording this, is so that we have the opportunity to be able to show with our experts that are with us today through these panels that it takes really a holistic approach to this challenge that faces all of us, the human tragedy, perhaps. And our summit is more about looking at the root causes as well as some of the best practices. Here, the first panel is about the root causes, and I can say anecdotally that as I am a mayor also in a city, the other hat I wear, and on a regular basis I go out with our sheriff department for ride-alongs in our area. What I have experienced homelessness to be more about externalities rather than simply the monolithic concept of housing. So that is what I want to explore with all of our experts. Perhaps the first one is Ricky, maybe I can start with you from an academic standpoint. Some of those externalities you study. Maybe you can comment on that to get us started.
Okay, so I think what you're asking me is, has drug use, for instance, or mental health contributed to the growing amount of homelessness in the United States, or in LA in particular? So just so you all know, I'm a drug use epidemiologist, sociologist by training, and for 20 years, or over 20 years, I've been studying health at risk and well-being among people who inject drugs in Los Angeles. And so the answer is no. So what we've observed is that the percentage of people who are unhoused has gone up dramatically in my populations, but it hasn't been because their drug use has changed. It's because the underlying market factors have changed, right? So my wife and I bought a house 20 years ago. Hopefully you're in that group. We've experienced 4 or 5 times return on that investment. And so as a consequence, housing is very expensive in Los Angeles. And so for people who are less economically viable because of mental health issues or because of substance use disorder, they're going to be non-competitive in a market that's red hot. And, just to riff a little bit, there is a structural racism component to this. Redlining, which has shut out Black and brown communities from the kind of asset growth that other groups have experienced, feeds into this problem. And so you have a circumstance that people end up not being able to find the security and sanctity that can come from a home because of these structural and historic and ongoing discriminatory practices.
Would you mind very much if I add to that, because it's such an important point? I'm Janie Roundtree. I'm the executive director of the California Policy Lab at UCLA, and our mission is really to do rigorous quantitative research and bring data to the conversation around social justice issues, including homelessness. And we host data from over 140 data sharing agreements with local and state agencies. And so many of you are business leaders. If you launch a product or a site or have a marketing strategy that isn't working, you will ask for data to diagnose why it's not working. And we need to start doing that in Los Angeles around homelessness and ground our conversations in facts. And one set of facts that I want to share is that I think we all know, if we study the history of California, we stopped building housing to keep pace with our population about 50 years ago. And those decisions are in a range of state policies, tax policies, zoning, redlining. It's not one single act by one person. It's a long history, and it's created a massive housing shortage. Tens of thousands of units are missing that would be affordable to people. And at the same time, income has stagnated. So between 2000 and 2017, rents in LA increased 32%. There's no question that they've increased even more in the 5 years since that study was done. During that same time period, income decreased by 3%. It is only in the last probably 8 years that safety net programs like Social Security are no longer able to sustain an older disabled adult in housing in LA. This is a recent phenomenon. The homelessness crisis that you are looking at is one of economic security and poverty. And I challenge anyone to find reliable, credible data that will show anything else. The people experiencing homelessness, like our larger population, are incredibly diverse, and they have a wide variety of complex needs, whether they're survivors of domestic violence or the people suffering from serious mental illness. We linked data from people receiving homeless services in the county to clinical diagnosis data of serious mental illness. And there are just under 6,000 people on our street in a recent year with psychotic spectrum disorder. 6,000 individuals specifically with psychotic spectrum disorder. That is a massive number of people who need a coordinated response. 6,000 people is not the 80,000 people experiencing homelessness in LA. Sorry for launching in, but when I saw the survey that opened the session today and saw that only 5% of the respondents believe that this is an issue of living wage, only 18% believe that this is an issue of housing, I really have been sitting with that, for the last hour and been really eager to share what I hope are some more grounding facts. This is absolutely a crisis of serious mental illness if we are allowing ourselves as a society to allow 6,000 people with psychotic spectrum disorder to live out their disease on the street. But that is not the entire homeless population, and we have to stop treating it as if everyone experiencing homelessness and every DV survivor and every veteran has a serious mental illness.
So 2 comments. One, someone earlier mentioned deinstitutionalization. We saw mass exits from the institutions. We saw a huge increase of prisons. Going back even to the end of slavery, Black men who were not working would be arrested. So looking at systemic systems, history, looking at deinstitutionalization, also the spike of psychopharmacology. You see Prozac launching at certain periods around the time of when the institutions closed. You saw mass exits nationally. So a lot of what we see is a lot of what we did and do. So just keep that in mind. We have a gift as humans to repeat patterns and repeat things that we do and maybe not self-reflect enough. The other piece, on a more proactive, future-oriented piece, I never go on vacation. When I worked for the Housing Commission, I actually could go on vacation because things ran slower. And went to Iceland, and I happened to be there during a housing conference. And I chatted with some people there. I'm like, how do you keep up with your population? Obviously, it's smaller than Los Angeles. But they shared they had an actuarian look at their population, do age estimates, do disparity estimates, like you were talking about certain statistics related to the population, and they based their larger budget off of it, which was brilliant, and then they allocated housing accordingly. So if we start to look more at real stats and real data, we have the ability to construct a very, very bright future. But until then, we'll still have these pockets of initiatives and terms of politicians, and we'll never get there.
Suzanne, any?
Yeah, so I'm so glad you three went first because you actually are the experts with regards to this issue. I have a very different perspective, and I like that you opened this with saying this is a holistic approach. So I represent the business community. I represent a downtown business improvement district. We are funded by property tax assessments to provide clean, safe marketing and economic development services. My bid is the Central Business District of downtown Los Angeles. We have been around for almost 25 years. And when we were formed, one of the first things our board said is that homelessness is the biggest issue in our district and we want to be part of the solution. I'm a business organization. They developed their own in-house program that went along for a while, and about 7 years ago, we decided we needed something more, and we wanted to contract with a third party. And I joined the Business Improvement District from a background in commercial real estate management. And so I started interviewing social service providers. And it was exhausting. It was like they were speaking a language that I didn't speak. Right now I have monthly reports. We ended up contracting with PATH, people that assisting the homeless. On the monthly reports, I said, you have to provide a legend for me for the acronyms, because it's an alphabet soup of acronyms. There's 27 different acronyms that are used on my 3-page report. And so my perspective about the root causes of homelessness is, and these are all, valid and very true. But when I think about the cause, I'm thinking about the causes of the perpetuity of homelessness. Like year after year, we've been doing it and it's still there. We've been working at this for 25 years and we're not seeing improvement. And we want to be part of the solution. We want to help. And what I'm experiencing is a lot of what the comments that I heard earlier is there's a lot of roadblocks actually to providing service. You must have mentioned jumping through hoops. It's unbelievable, and the rubber bands. And so while yes, absolutely, there are horrific incidents in these individuals' lives that got them to this position, I think as a system, and as someone whose stakeholders are trying to work very hard within this system to help, we do not make it easy. And I think that prevents us from being part of the solution.
Thank you, Suzanne. That actually segues into perhaps my next inquiry, and that is, I'm a public administrator. I'm a mayor. I find my problem as I find it, and my job is to solve the problem. Whether it's a pothole or pruning a tree, whatever it is, it's my job to solve the problem. It's not to think about necessarily how it happened. It's important how it happened, but ultimately it's my job to solve it. So my next questioning perhaps to you all is, now that we have talked about some of the root causes and some of the externalities, which may be economic, mental health, addiction, etc., housing, all of them combined, perhaps now there are some movements in looking at potentially wraparound or all-in-one-place types of services. I think Wendy Correa, for example, was looking at repurposing a hospital that was abandoned to try to bring in various services under one roof, as well as housing under one roof. Could you comment on that kind of an approach, again, to look at potentially solving these challenges?
This is HA. And I'm sorry I didn't do a proper introduction. I'm HA Galka-Gonyeau, Director of Permanent Supportive Housing and Residential Services for National Core and Hope Through Housing. Related to co-located services, it's brilliant. I personally helped open Connections Housing under PATH years ago in San Diego. I also helped open a navigation center, the first of its kind, also in San Diego. And you see a different experience. One, you can control kind of making everything have the same trauma-informed theme across the representatives from all the services, whether it be mental health, the county, medical, case management, and so forth, or domestic violence interventions. But it's easier. Instead of someone traveling an hour by bus to get one service, go get medical care, refill a prescription for their high blood pressure, or treat their amputated toes from diabetes, and try to struggle to get to the next stop, or grab paper A to get to paper B to turn this in at station C, it eliminates all that. And to do that one gift to someone who's suffering and who has gone through the rat race and maze is imperative. You see so much more output from their effort. It reinforces that this different system, co-located system, works better, and people have a little bit more faith, and it motivates folks.
Unhoused population is crazy diverse. Just really, there's 1,001 ways that people find themselves unhoused, and so I think you need everything. So you also need mobile places that build relationships with people in the places that they are. And you'll probably get to this, but I'll just go ahead and say it now. I mean, I recognize that unhoused encampments are unsightly and appear chaotic, and maybe are. But this process of moving people around, which is all you're doing, ends up being devastating for their well-being and their capacity to actually work their way through the system. And it's part of the reason why LAHSA has inefficiencies, right? Because you have the categorical funding, you'll have a spot open up, you find them on this corner, you've confirmed that the spot is actually available, you come back 3 days later, and they're nowhere to be found. Right? And that's because we're constantly churning and moving people around. And it's bad for humans. We're not built to be that. We're not built to have that level of constant insecurity, disruption of social support, disruption of access to food, clean water, sanitation. And so I do think one message I have for the business community and everyone else who's here is, we have to stop digging that hole. And we have to engage with these populations rather than saying, I don't like what you're doing there, and so I'm going to make sure that you move that to somewhere else. That's actually part of the problem, not part of the solution.
But Ricky, let me push back and say, what does that engagement look like?
It's relationship building. There's a project that I've had the good fortune to be evaluating that's actually law enforcement related. So it's law enforcement assisted diversion in the Hollywood area. And the case managers have, modest caseloads, and they go the extra mile, sort of like the Trieste model. So there's a case where one person found themselves kicked out of a residential treatment center. And the case manager spent the weekend with that person, taking them to visit their mom, spending some time just sitting at the beach, watching the ocean, until they were able to find an appropriate place to put them on Monday to continue their treatment course. So, I do think we need that flexibility, and it is relationships, and people they're being brutalized right now. So and this is the most shocking stat I have. So we've interviewed since May of last year about 150 people who inject drugs, so they're heroin and methamphetamine users in Los Angeles. And among the women and transgendered population, 24% of them have been raped in the last 3 months. So they're being brutalized. And when we do other things that brutalize them, like disrupting their capacity to develop social support and find food and it just makes it worse. So I understand people, it's easy to be against the encampments, but disrupting them is not a solution. It's part of the problem.
I just wanted to add, I think the original question was around a specific model of co-locating services with housing, but I think the theme really, the consistent theme is human-centered design. Are the systems that we set up to serve and help people, can they access them? Are they trauma-informed? Can you navigate them? And so we've given some examples, injection drug users. There might be some of them who would live in a low barrier shelter if they existed, right? Where they are not on the street. But they're probably not at that moment in time going to go into a shelter unless it's a low barrier shelter that's designed for people who are active drug users. But I want to talk about another group of people experiencing homelessness that need human-centered design, and those are people who are just trying to increase their income. This is hugely protective when we have lack of economic security, and our systems make it incredibly complicated to do something as simple as enroll or be recertified for food stamps, or what we call CalFresh. Many women who are single heads of households are eligible for CalWorks. CalWorks is TANF, Temporary Aid for Needy Families. It provides job search assistance. It provides income supports. It is wildly under-enrolled in Los Angeles. And it's also the conduit for homeless services for families from the state funding level, right? So a really important strategy to keep more families from becoming homeless is enrolling them in a federally funded safety net program that is not even coming out of county coffers. And we make it impossible to do it by all of the different steps that you really need a degree to figure out how to navigate just the enrollment forms. And there's a whole legal profession that's designed to help people with the enrollment process. And we really have to think about human-centered design, whether it's in that instance or I think in the original example where you have a more trauma-informed, easier to navigate system for people who have complex health needs as well.
Janie, let me follow up on that one, because one of the questions I had is what can the population, well, I'll break it down into two parts, because first, you spoke about a lot of folks who have a mental illness issue, psychotic, etc. How do you first address them to connect them to various services that are out there? And maybe the second part of the question is, how do you address those who want to help themselves but can't because they don't know about it based on some of the services that are available?
So I think when we're talking about people who are living on the street, who have active psychotic disorders, the good news is that Los Angeles has incredibly talented clinicians and service providers who know how to help these people. I don't think that it's a situation where we don't have any idea what to do. There are way too few of those people, and they're working in a system that's very hard to navigate. And the resources that they need to connect people to are dwindling. So Carrie raised one of the most urgent state legislative priorities. If you leave this room with anything today, you should go and advocate for board and care reimbursement rate reform so that we stop losing these critical facilities. So people, there are teams called home teams that are funded by the Department of Mental Health. There are other providers operating outside the public mental health system who know how to engage people on the street who have an active psychotic disorder. Many of those people, I think it's important to understand, their psychosis is related to or expressing a fear of being housed. You have to be incredibly patient and empathetic, and it's hard work, but you can get people who are experiencing that to eventually get connected on medication and more stable. But the people that I've interacted with who are suffering from that need an advocate working 24/7 to help them navigate through all of the resources and get the care that they need if they're lucky to do that, right? So it's just, part of it is just increasing the capacity to do the things that we know we need to do. More trained street outreach workers, but more importantly, connecting them to the services and the placements that they need, and understanding that for that population, it's a combination of housing and clinical support. The point I was trying to make earlier is that those 6,000 people are the most visible. When you're driving around Los Angeles, unless you work on the issue and sit with the data, that's your perception. You know, this is the homeless crisis in Los Angeles because they're very visible. And the truth is that many families, 40% of people who receive homeless services in Los Angeles were earning wages in California before they became homeless, right before they became homeless. They don't want to be seen. You know, they're living in their cars, they're going to work. They're not going to be the people that you, when you're driving around your neighborhood, that you identify even as being homeless, but they are on our streets and they are part of the problem. So I apologize. I will go back to your question. I think for that group of people, there's basic good public administration that could be done. You just need to cut the red tape. You need to make it easy for people to access programs. You need to create a central point of information rather than having it be different in every neighborhood, have a different number, a different website, a different set of people. You know, there's just, I think, really good public administration that could improve people's experiences with these programs.
Thank you. Suzanne, yeah, in fact, I was going to ask you specifically on, we passed Measure H with a very substantial support, the way I recall. All of our cities supported Measure H. Now, that may have looked different from different communities, but for what I remember, in our city communities, we supported Measure H substantially. That being said, how is that working with respect to your community, the business community, and are you able to tap those resources to be able to deal with it?
Well, that's what I was going to talk about, just the difficulty in accessing, these resources. And first of all, I want to say, Ricky, I couldn't agree more. Just moving people around is not effective. And again, not an expert in this, and this is just by, experience and working with the experts that we hired. I mean, they can spend months caseworking an individual. And if that individual is moved into a location where they don't have a sense of community, where they don't have the support, it's not going to last. It's not successful. It doesn't make any difference. So, I mean, we really are committed to affecting meaningful results. And, I know I'm learning as we're going on. And the challenge, the easiest thing is the people that want help. The people that are out there, and they are just beyond figuring out how to access that help themselves. These are the people that we're most successful with because they know they need help. They don't know how to get it. They don't have their ID. And those are the things that we can help them with. So that's our sweet spot, is we can bridge that gap. The greatest challenge are those with severe mental illness. And that is really beyond our reach. And so I'm sure there are very talented people out there. My understanding from our outreach, because we reach out to a lot of the city and county agencies, there's not very many of them. And I mean, there was one individual in our district that obviously had mental illness issues. We would see him every day get followed by a gang of people every month, when his benefits came around. Our team was actively trying to assist him. We reached out to the county, and finally I said to the county, if you have this organization, I have a team of caseworkers and an organization that wants to help one person, and we cannot get one person help, what kind of chance does everybody else have? So it's a little challenging.
I think just to add to that, I've been doing this about 20 years. Half of it was direct service, and this latter half is more administrative. We had a particular client that was going through hard times, was living on the streets, severe mentally ill, major health issues. The location where she typically would stay would be right where the Santa Monica Pier is and the Lobster. And the businesses were very displeased. The hotels would complain. We'd intervene. We worked very closely with PD because they would jump in sometimes and they would document. At the time, the capacity of this individual was very, very grim, meaning helping her get back on medication, stabilize, et cetera, that we were even looking into conservatorship. To protect her from situations like you mentioned, when that check comes in, the vultures come. And we were not successful. Even with working side by side with DMH social workers, mental health workers, working side by side document with PD, working side by side with case management. At the time it was OPCC, now it's the people concerned. And we worked wrapped around this person, connecting with them on a daily basis. And the systems halted so much progress that this woman suffered and repeatedly had incidences in the public because we couldn't intervene and go past a certain point, even with documentation, even with collaboration. So it definitely needs to be looking at the system as well.
Now, given that with all this brain power, with all of these academic institutions, governments, etc., we have not yet solved the challenge. We now have business, nonprofits, and academia here. If I were to ask you to speak collectively to the group as to how we can mobilize to change that history, perhaps, of not being able to deal with it. I understand perhaps I'm asking the impossible, but I want each of you to reflect and see from your perspective, what is it that we can do collectively to address the issue and perhaps bring more of a collaborative to solve, as opposed to pointing fingers and as opposed to saying, you're the problem, we need to fix this problem. So how do we address that? Suzanne, maybe I can start with you.
I mean, I would say we need to develop a real system of support of groups that work together, and so it doesn't feel like I'm starting a conversation all over again, and I'm learning anew every time I reach out to a new entity, and include the business community as part of this conversation, and have people that can speak to that community, because I promise you they do want to help, but it's almost as hard for the clients to access the services as it is for the business community to access the ways to help. But we need to break down these barriers. And someone, I forget who it was, said that it's competitive. And I got that. And not being part of the system, it was unusual to me because I thought everyone would be on the team. So I don't know how you do it, but in my perfect world, it would be break down all those barriers. So all of these really awesome organizations are working together and working with the community, because I think collectively there are the resources out there to help this.
I think to add one comment is to make the RFPs, those requests for proposals, reflect what's needed, because oftentimes the nonprofits are at the whim of what's dictated in those documents, meaning they'll serve this population, they'll get it done within this term. And if you shape those around a bigger picture, like you were saying, having a collaborative with the businesses, with other representation from medical, mental health, SUD services, et cetera, that you could actually make some really impactful programs. On the end, also building the housing at the same time, so there's places to exit too. Because because you could build 10 shelters, 3 detox centers, and you have really no place to exit to. You could hand out 1,000 vouchers, but do you have 1,000 front doors?
I'll let you go last because you're so good. But, so let me just make the argument that there's a structural component to it. I know you'll talk to this, but let's just throw out the easy sociological structural part, which is like, higher minimum wage, rent control, more public investment in housing. Ben Hinwood, a colleague of mine in the social work school points out that we radically disinvested from housing in the United States in the Reagan era. And we're reaping the sort of the consequence of that decision 40 years ago. So you're not going to make a ton of money housing poor people, right? We see the same thing in the medical system. We have a radically, every time you go into medical care, it's like you're going onto the airplane, and then the issue is, are you in first class or not, right? Most people aren't in first class. And it's structured in, it's part of the system. And so we have to just acknowledge that for some, they're not commodities, needs like housing, like healthcare, our private markets won't satisfy all of the needs. And so we need structural approaches that work on that make that housing available to people who need it. And then just in terms of my population, which are chronic substance users, we need to make the stuff we want people to do easy. So I've been studying my group since 1991. And at no point in my career has it been easier to get substance use treatment than it is to get illicit drugs. At no point has it been less expensive to get into drug treatment than it is to purchase illicit drugs. So we can change that. Right? We have great biomedical interventions for at least opiates, and new ones are coming along for methamphetamines all the time. We just make it really hard for people to get that. And we need to stop putting these we need to discipline the poor kind of approach, and more, look, we need to incentivize them to do the things that we'd like them to do. Right? That's how I work. I get all kinds of incentives for behaving myself and working hard. But we don't do that for low-income people in this country. And we need to change that sort of system.
Thank you. Jenny?
This is such an important question, and it's always, I think, the hardest one for panels, because I think we want, as human beings, a solution. And this is not an easy problem to solve, and I don't think there is one solution. I want to start by saying something that Ricky said as well, which is that often people, in response to this question, who work on homelessness will start by saying, we all know the solution is housing. But then they'll say, but we could also do these other things. And I think we do that because it's hard to imagine creating the amount of housing that we need to roll back a 50-year disinvestment. But I think to understand that is the root cause of homelessness helps put us on a path that stops blaming individuals for the circumstances that they find themselves in. So I do want to say the solution is housing. It's housing and it's income, and getting ourselves out of systemic poverty and understanding how economic forces are driving people into circumstances that are not in their control. I mentioned that 40% of families who become homeless are working and they're earning wages in California. Let me add that their annual wages are $9,900. $9,900 to live in Los Angeles. So the second thing I want to say is that I would not underestimate the psychological effect on service providers knowing that if they do all of this hard work, that there are not the resources at the end of the day to connect their clients, right? So if you ran a business that way, you just wouldn't, right? You wouldn't ask street outreach workers to go out every day and interact with a person who is active serious mental illness without knowing that there's a board and care placement for them, or a treatment, or a clinic that will take them that doesn't have bulletproof glass. And so I think connecting the fact that the system is disorganized and chaotic to the fact that it is under-resourced is hugely important, because if we could send all those people out with confidence that all their hard work, whether it takes a day or in some cases months, to get that person on the right path, that there would be something at the end of that, then I think you would see better public administration and better coordination with the right leadership. I'm not making excuses. We have to do the best we can with the resources we have. And Los Angeles is a very complex place to govern. I've spent my career working in New York City, Chicago, and LA. The big three cities have entirely different needs around governance than really any other county or city in the United States, right? So when you have 40 service providers, 7 service planning areas, a city, a county, and lots of non-city county agencies responsible for serving people, it's complex, and you need a lot of really intense work to get people to work together, and I believe we can do it. But I don't want to discount the fact that it's much harder to accomplish that when you're sending people out and they don't know that there's going to be a shelter bed or a permanent supportive housing placement or a clinical bed for the person that they're serving. So if the business community, I would just to leave on an action note, pay attention to the state bills that are relevant to these resource creation tasks, whether it's the board and care reimbursement rate or the way that nonprofits are funded, whether they're getting general operating support in addition to their bed placements or their voucher placements, whether it's a state law that's going to make it harder to build housing because of well-intended environmental regulations, whatever it is, connect those issues to this problem at a structural level. And I think that's something that's easy for anyone to do, even if you're not inclined to be on the street helping people every day. I think there's a really powerful role to play at the policy level too.
Janie, I want to follow up with something that Ricky earlier said, developing a relationship. How much or what are we doing to develop that relationship, if anything, with centers like yours or other services that we may have at various levels of government, academia, not-for-profits? Go ahead.
If the question is about relationships to the California Policy Lab, we're about 5 years old. We're located at UCLA, and we would welcome any partnership. We're relatively new, I think, in this space compared to people, including every panelist here who's been working on these issues for much longer. But I think one strength of Los Angeles actually is that there's the number of forums that invite diverse voices, whether it's from academia or data scientists like my lab, or from public agencies. I think what we need is to make those interactions more meaningful as a common purpose and a common set of facts, so that we can leave these rooms really on the same page about what's going to be most impactful.
Ricky, any comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I do think more talking is better and learning. I mean, I've learned a lot today from the first 2 speakers in this panel, so I always appreciate that. And I think also maybe more conversation about what we all have in common. So, one of the things that I think I figured out earlier in my research career is that the people in my research study are just as important as I am, and I let them know that. And I think we need to get back to that place. Sure, we all have different, autobiographies and experiences and opportunities, and we've all made good choices and bad choices. But at the end of the day, we should all be in favor of human dignity. And if we're starting from that place, the problems won't get easier to solve, but coming up with solutions will be.
Yeah, you said it well, human dignity. I've been a huge human rights advocate because of my own personal ancestry and backgrounds, particularly on genocide prevention, etc. All my legal career, I've advocated on the topic of human rights. You're so right. I wish that we were more dignified in our approach to our humanity, if I could say it that way. My last question, perhaps, is that You know, we live in a very decentralized, you talked about governance, that's one of my disciplines, and certainly I care about good governance. Good governance, of course, relates to transparency, accountability, the results, some of the things that we talked about, effectiveness, etc. And we are in a decentralized form of government, which means that we have various levels of governments that deal with several types of issues. And sometimes the problem has been in the governance system is the interaction between these governments have been disjointed. So my last question to all of you is, if you had a magic wand, how would you fix that disjointedness of various levels of governments, city, districts, counties, and state, in order to bring back that relationship that Ricky talked about, the dignity that Ricky talked about, and that you all commented on? How do we bring this collaboration together? And finally, of course, our very important private sector, by the way, which I find them to be part and parcel of our governance system. In a 21st century, there is no way government can address everything that is possibly out there. So we live in a world of sectors, and we live in a world of sectors that actually collaborate or must collaborate in order for all of us to succeed. So how do you address this kind of integration, so to speak, if we could, of these governments, and where are the sweet spots perhaps that can be exploited?
I'll mention something more on the simplistic level. When serving folks in the field, systems don't talk to each other. So you have the VA that has their own system, and oftentimes they can't even access other systems with their security levels. You have obviously CS, HMIS, you have all these systems, and you're trying to coordinate care for someone. It's rather impossible. It's a lot of conversations, a lot of release of informations. It creates the barriers. And then when you're looking even higher than that, the only time in 20 years that I saw progress is when we had like the head of the VA in a room, the head of HCD in a room, and they all constructed common objectives. So that would go back to their agencies and create a ripple effect of influence of what things would change or might not or be modified. So, I mean, something like that is the only time I've ever seen in over 20 years anything move towards that, but it was effective.
The governance is so important, and I think it's helpful to understand how unique the Los Angeles County and city region is. You know, in New York City, there's a strong mayor who runs every public agency, right? From jails to the public school system, to social services, to the courts, everything but the subway. So you can't blame him for the subway, but it's hard to imagine in LA a system like that. So I think we have to, there are no fewer, by the way, than 4 massive public reports published in the last year trying to diagnose the issue of governance around homeless services in LA. And you can read them all online. And I think that's a reflection of the importance of this issue on serving people. I think if I had a magic wand, you know, maybe I would create one central government. But if that's not possible, I think to get to the vision of what worked, what you really need is to break the county down into small geographies and have specific goals for homeless population in each of those areas, and bring every resource to the table around a common goal or key performance metric, measure it every quarter, and then when you're not meeting it, diagnose what is happening to those people and what they need, and have everyone in the room. And it's going to be K-12 school districts, social services, Department of Mental Health, Department of Health Services, Housing for Health, the County Homeless Initiative, WASA, and the service providers. So you've got 5 or 6 units of government that have got to sit in that room and coordinate. But I think if we had a clarity of the thing, a measurement of the problem, and an understanding of the people, and it's going to look slightly different where you are. You know, the Antelope Valley might need a different strategy than the downtown area. And giving those people who become experts in that region the flexibility to leverage the resources that are available to them and just work the problem, work for the people. I think that would do it. What I'm saying is extremely hard to do, but I don't think, impossible.
Ricky, let's go.
Well, I'll just do real quick, and I can't believe I'm about to say what I'm going to say. But I think also law enforcement.
Yes, I definitely agree. Thank you.
In terms of recognizing that they're getting called all the time, in Los Angeles City, I know for sure we've created this system where the police are constantly being like, "Hey, go do something about that," and they need to be working with other people so that they have something that they can do that isn't, that's different than what happens. I won't even characterize the percentage that happens sometimes, right? Where it ends up being an arrest or a confrontation, which no one wants. But they certainly can be, certainly need to be in the dialogue and the conversation about how to make that work. And then I do think maybe the only other thing I'd add is we do have to start believing in our collective capacity to solve things, and that the way that happens is actually through our government. And we do have a democratic government, and that we should be engaging in a proactive way, and not just in a, I don't like what's happening, so we need a new whatever, right? Our democracy depends on our involvement, and since the unhoused situation is one that we all have a stake in, I think we need to have patience and be willing to contribute to the solutions by working together.
Suzanne?
Yeah, I'll be brief. At the ballot box, legislators care about votes, and this all has to do with leadership, and we need strong leadership at the city and the county level. And legislators don't want to hear from businesses, I assure you. They want to hear from voters. Pick up the phone, call them, write them. But that's where it's all going to start, because if it doesn't start from the top, it's not going to happen.
Well, thank you for that, and our time is up, but we do have time for questions. I know you have a bunch, and actually, on the topic of law enforcement, Ricky, we have a lieutenant here from the Sheriff's Department, and I've heard him before, and they have an amazing record, actually, with their relationship with the homeless community. I won't steal his thunder, but I'm sure he'll talk about that, but in any event. All right, so where's the microphone?
Right here.
Oh, you please, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Casey O'Neill here with Biocom California. I've always had a heart for folks experiencing homelessness, and I've always just been asking myself, what can I do? I'm not in local government per se. I'm just an average everyday person. I am a female. How do I go out there on foot and help people? And what I think that we've been able to see, especially during the pandemic, is the importance and the need for social media. I'm not like a social media guru, but the thing is that when you get young folks who are really excited about making change, right? George Floyd, okay? Things happen when we come together. So instead of looking at local government for all of the answers, because they have 1,000,010 things on their mind, why don't we desperately try to get enough knowledge and education and a playbook into the hands of someone like me? What can I go do? Where are the resources that I can go walk up to this gentleman on the street and say, I'm going to help you? Here are the resources. It's like in my mind, I see two things. I see, Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come, right? So if there is a desire and a need and a hunger of the average everyday person, and that's where we have to change the narrative, the perspective. This is a human being on the street.
So the question obviously is, what can you do?
What can we do? Yeah.
Can I jump in here?
Of course.
So for that, you see amazing agencies like PATH, Union Station, doing wonderful panels that bring a human connection to individuals that experience homelessness. I think that's number one. Like you said, connecting and humanizing the issue. If we don't have that, we're all going to be like, oh, it's over there. Not in my backyard. But if you realize many people are one paycheck away and it's very personal, and you see a story that somehow aligns with you, your grandma, your sister, whoever, it makes it personal and you want to participate. For participating, one thing that I've heard echoed across many different amazing agencies over the years is aligning with them. supporting them in some way on their efforts. So instead of just handing out brown paper bags, which people don't realize oftentimes the bags get thrown on the street, get clogged in the sewer, like there's a whole kind of ripple effect with that. It feels good in the moment, but thinking about the impact long term, how do you make that brown bag go farther? Team up with a social worker team from PATH or Union Station or other entities. Walk side by side with them or produce the tool that they can use to engage folks. That's impactful, that's powerful, and it's also leveraging what services and programs that are out there. So in that moment, they might get that brown bag, you feel good, you did something that you participated in, you gave back, but also in that moment, they're assessed, perhaps maybe they're referred to a clinician or seen in the field, sometimes there's street medicine, something like that could create that pathway of trust that could connect the dots in that moment, which is huge and very impactful.
Perhaps one more question.
Good morning. Hi, everyone. I'm Luis Vasquez with Lava. It's a marketing agency. First, I want to give a shout out to Kevin for organizing this important summit and discussion. The masked man. My question is really going to come out of left field. Came a little late this morning, and it's a magic wand type of a question. Which is what can we do to begin the discussion of exploring home ownership, that is home ownership for people of color, specifically Latinos. We are at the bottom of the rung when it comes to home ownership. And the sad fact is, as most of you know, if you've owned a home and if you rent it, sometimes it is less to pay the mortgage than it is to pay your, less to pay the mortgage than it is to pay your rent. And if we're talking about wealth creation, the sure path outside of entrepreneurship is in a home. That creates stability, that creates community. And I'd love for you to think about that. And just the last point here, what motivates me to think about this audacious idea is Habitat for Humanity. If they can do that, we can certainly do that. The wealthiest state in the country, the wealthiest nation in the world, we can create homes, I think, for people who are in need in mass scale. Thanks for this.
Thank you for the question. So, wealth creation, home ownership.
I just want to acknowledge that I love the spirit of this question. You know, why aren't we dreaming as big as we possibly can for everyone? I will also say that I'm not an expert on this topic, and I'm hoping maybe Professor Gary Painter, who's on the next panel, will talk about housing and maybe work in an answer to this question. I will say, though, that there's a lot of research that shows systemic racism holding people back from home ownership through things like very obvious and systemic racial bias in mortgages, in interactions with home sellers, credit worthiness, how people build credit and become eligible for loans. You know, we have to, if we want to increase wealth and home ownership, I think we have to attack those issues all the way from the beginning, increasing opportunities for access to employment, building credit, and then navigating your way through the mortgage industry, which has been shown over and over again to apply lower credit scores to people with all the same facts, depending on their race or ethnicity, if it's known. So I think those are just some of the things to pay attention to. But I just wanted to say that I love that question, and that should be the goal.
We have, from our online virtual folks, we have a question, so go ahead.
So we have a question here from Barbara. When we talk about building and maintaining permanent supportive housing for even half of the current homeless in LA, the cost, particularly at current levels, is likely unsustainable. And while voters supported homeless housing programs like Measure H, public faith is dwindling. Even if we can build all the needed units, how will we sustain the operating costs over time, realizing that there is little alternative?
I just want to give one quick answer to that, and then I'll give it to AJ, but sorry, AJ. There's no question that it's too expensive to build housing and that we need to have reform to make it less expensive. But I did want to challenge the idea that it's more expensive to build and maintain housing than it is to provide the intensive emergency services that we are providing to people every day. I don't know that that's borne out by the data. So if you have someone arrested multiple times, going to the emergency department, they have a transport for every interaction with the fire department, with the sheriff's office, they're receiving mobile street health medicine, whatever it is, there have been studies that show that over time is actually quite a bit more expensive than one permanent supportive housing unit.
You said that so well. So I'll just add, if you wanted to Google studies that actually show the cost savings, there's Project 25. There's numerous ones that actually Path did, I believe with Kaiser in LA. You have some up in King County that are really fabulous tools to look at the cost savings benefit. So when you do look at that per unit cost, you actually can see the ripple effect, the savings, the cost savings from all those systems of care that also allows those systems of care to help more people because they're not inundated. Just like we saw with COVID, those ERs got maxed out. These services can be maxed out by helping this population at high volume. One other piece, like you mentioned before, is looking at ways within politics and policy how we can remove some of the restrictions when you're kind of compiling and putting together a deal to make a PSH development. There's living wage rules, Section 3, other things that get added into the mix that just cost a lot of money, and that's why the amounts go up. So often has you attached to vouchers or other things, you hit certain thresholds where you have to follow certain rules, and that's why the amount pops up.
Yeah, if I may comment on that as well, saying that you're absolutely right, AJ. It becomes ultimately a balancing act of public good. Whether it's the living wage to be a public good that is important, or it is important to get the cost of housing down to be able to deliver roofs over people's heads. Ultimately, it becomes to that balancing act, if you will. Indeed, in California, perhaps more so than most states, and I see my colleague Gary Painter here, who's much more expertise on the topic of the housing, but our costs are astronomical. When it comes to building, the average is about $600,000, $700,000 a door in our area here, and it's really, really a challenge. With that, I really want to thank all of our panel members. This has been a terrific conversation. And I also want to, I just saw one of my favorite Bruins walk in, former council member from Santa Monica, Pam O'Connor. Hi, Pam. Thank you very much for being here as well.